Hey guys, Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 programming languages you should be learning right now in order to prepare to go out and get a job or to just get started with programming this year. Coming in at number 5, we have C++. C++ is a general-purpose programming language, meaning you can basically use it to make anything you want to. When it was designed with the idea of being the C language with classes implemented. Because C++ uses classes to create objects and has inheritance, it is considered an object-oriented programming language. Because it's basically just an object-oriented version of C, they carry a lot of the same syntax, which means by learning C++, you're also going to be learning a lot of C, or if you already know a lot of C, you'll do pretty well at the beginning of C++. Unlike a lot of other object-oriented programming languages used today, C++ contains some low-level functionality, such as the ability to manipulate memory. That means your programs will have a lot more control over how much memory they use and where exactly data is stored, retrieved from, and when it's gotten rid of while it's running. You can basically find C++ used everywhere. It's used in video games with things like the Source Engine, which Left 4 Dead and Counter-Strike run on. It's used in things like desktop applications like Photoshop and Premiere and the other Adobe software, and it's used for database systems like MySQL. However, a common complaint about C++ is that it's very complicated and complex. One example of this is when it comes to memory allocation. We talked about that low-level functionality earlier where you can dictate exactly where things should be stored, but that comes at a cost where C++ doesn't automatically come with a garbage collector like a lot of other programming languages. A garbage collector's job is to go back through and clean up memory stores that aren't being used anymore while your program is running. So although the low-level functionality C++ has allows you to have a lot more control over exactly how your program works, it also means that you're stuck dealing with a lot of the cleanup work a lot of other languages would do automatically for you. Most of these issues can be solved by importing different libraries, but once you've imported a ton of different libraries into your program, it just starts to get more complicated, more complex, and harder to read as you go. So we can applaud C++ for how great it is for writing fast, streamlined applications of all different kinds, and how comprehensive it is, but that comprehensiveness and power comes at a cost. If you're working on a giant project where you've imported a ton of libraries, you can very quickly end up with a jumbled mess of code that's just hard to read, and you can run into all kinds of issues that are really hard to catch. So for an experienced programmer, this might all sound great, and there doesn't seem to be any issues, but for beginners, you might want to be a little bit wary and go with something that's a bit easier to read and start out with, and that takes care of a lot of that extra work for you. And with that being said, it's worth noting that C++ was the first language that I learned, and I definitely made every single one of these mistakes while I was learning. Next up, coming in at number 4, we have JavaScript. Without JavaScript, the internet would not be like it is today, because it is one of the main components as is used in 97% of all websites. It's an event-driven programming language, meaning that it waits for a user to interact with the web page or whatever you're writing it for, and then it responds to that. So basically, it's just used to add interactivity to just about every website you probably go to every day. Just because it's mainly used for web development doesn't mean that's all it's good for. With tools these days like Node.js, you can develop server-side applications that run on your computer and not on the web. This means that by learning JavaScript, you're not limiting yourself to only working with web pages. You could also find yourself developing tools to send information to web pages, or even working on games and really anything you could with a normal language. When it was being created, it was created with Java syntax and libraries in mind, meaning that if you have experience with Java, you're going to find a lot of the things really familiar with this language, or if you have not worked with Java yet, you'll be getting a little bit of experience with how that will end up looking if you learn that in the future. An issue with JavaScript comes in security issues. The main one being that I could write malicious code on my website that runs or does bad things on the client's computer, but that's negated in a handful of ways we won't go into in this video, but they've made a lot of effort to cover that up. And then another concern is because the code that you write is being run on the client side most of the time for like web applications, you can't exactly hide how it's working. So if you write things poorly, it can be very easy for somebody who's malicious to get into your website and cause issues like data breaches and stuff like that. So you have to be really careful and really responsible when writing JavaScript code that's handling important information for people. All that being said though, there really isn't much of a replacement for JavaScript. It is the interactive web language out there. So if you have any interest in web development, this is a very important language for you to learn. And speaking of web development, coming in at number 3, we have HTML and CSS kind of merged together. The reason for this merging is you can't really have one without the other. They really bring out the best in each other, and if you just learn one without the other one, Well, if you just learn CSS, you're not going to be in a very good position. If you just learn HTML, you're going to write some really ugly looking web pages. HTML and CSS are what I'll call the other main components of the internet. Between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you've basically made up every web page on the internet. Where JavaScript would be the interactive part and basically the brain of the website, HTML will be what we consider the structure and the bones, and CSS is the style or beauty or skin, if you want to be weird, of the website. And just a quick note, I would highly not recommend ever going into an interview and calling CSS the skin of a website. I don't think you'll make it very far, but feel free to prove me wrong. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language and is a markup language, and CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets and is a style sheet language. Shocker, I know. Although the main use you're probably going to get out of it in your professional life is going to be styling web pages, you'll find often that it's used for more than just web pages out in the world. For example, a lot of emails offer HTML and CSS styling, so you can basically make a really pretty looking email and really impress everybody you send it to. And even things like eBay allow you in the description to write HTML code and CSS code to make a really pretty looking description and get your item sold quicker. And on the note of eBay, it's also worth noting that HTML and CSS can be a really good side hustle along with your main job. You can basically get a lot of really easy web development work if you're good at it and have a good enough portfolio. So, use that to supplement your income if you decide to learn it. It's also just a really good, easy starting language to learn. A lot of the times when you go to college for computer science or computer science engineering, stuff like that, you're going to run into at least a little bit of time where you're working with HTML and CSS just because it's a great way to learn how to write good, well-written, well-organized code. So unless you're an animal who just writes your entire HTML page in one giant block, you're going to get really good practice at writing in blocks and indenting properly, and overall just write prettier code in the future. And it's also just really great to learn first because there are tons of free online resources for it. There are websites that will check your syntax and just make sure you're writing things properly. There are websites that'll basically do anything for you and explain any tag, all for free out there, compared to a lot of other languages where you have to use paid resources to get good content. Or, you can subscribe to a YouTube channel that tries to make good free content. I'm just saying. And with all that out of the way, we now get down to the bottom where we have our issue, and it's a big one, and it's that you're not going to really get that far only knowing these two. Once again, if you're a beginner, you shouldn't really be thinking about going right into the job market right now. You should be starting slow, and this is a great place to get going. But the main issue with it is they're both just styling languages, really, so you're not really getting any of the logic of programming. And when you really boil it down, the logic is the difficult part of programming, and it's why software engineers get the big bucks if they can understand it and implement it properly. And if I didn't lose your attention with that huge chunk of a section, we have number 2, which is Java. Not to be confused with JavaScript, which you talked about earlier, Java is more comparable to C++ because it's also a general-purpose programming language that's object-oriented. Its motto is write once, run anywhere, and that is exactly what it was designed to be because it's a very portable language. By using its Java virtual machine, you can basically think about it like any time that you install Java on a computer, you're installing an extra little virtual computer inside there that should run any bytecode.class file the exact same way. And that .class file is basically just compiled Java code. So to simplify that even more, it's basically just Java is a language you can write on your home computer and then put it on a USB thumb drive, bring it to your great-great-grandmother's house, and run it on her computer as long as the Java virtual machine is installed on it, and it should run the exact same way. Well, it might run a little bit slower unless great-great-grandma's repping the newest CPU and graphics card like I'm sure your computer is. But the specs of your granny's machine aside, we're going to keep moving forward. And the next thing that could either be a good or bad thing, depending on how you look at it, is it has a less low-level functionality than C++. So if you're writing something that's really down in the grass and needs to dictate exactly how the machine will work with the data you give it, then this is a negative, and you should probably prefer C++ over Java. But on the other hand, if you're writing a program that's just a general application, then you really don't need that extra intense functionality that C++ offers. And by Java, including things like a garbage collector that will clean up your machine for you rather than you having to go through and make sure you're not leaving a mess, it just becomes a way easier program to write and a lot less messy code to go back and read. But back to something that's just all around good, Java is used in all kinds of things. If you're the side hustle kind of guy like we mentioned earlier, it is the main language used for Android app development. So, you can go ahead and make a little bit of extra side cash by developing some apps. It has some pretty good libraries for graphic user interfaces, so any kind of application you can think of that would run on a desktop and have, just graphics that a user would interact with to work with the program, it's a great language for doing that. And as I'm sure a lot of you already know, it's used in all kinds of video games, including Minecraft, so even if you just want to develop games, it's a great language to learn for that too. Overall, just anywhere you look, if it's an application, you could probably make it with Java, and you can make it pretty well. But with all the good out of the way, we have to get to at least one bad thing, and that's that Java does run slower than C++. Because C++ has that extra low-level functionality that allows you to dictate exactly how your program runs, you can make incredibly efficient and just memory-efficient, fast-running code compared to Java, where because a lot of the things are just taken care of for you, it gets rid of a lot of headache, but it can lead to code not running as efficiently as it could be doing. So when you're working with machines or an application that's limited in how much memory you can use, or how much power you have on the system it'll be running on, then Java can end up not being the best language for the job. And finally, what we've all been waiting for, we are at number 1, and that is Python. And if you have any experience with programming and you've been following along with how things are going, this is not a shocker at all. Python is a general-purpose programming language, so it is comparable to C++ and Java and languages like that, but it's not quite the same. Where those ones are compiled languages, where you have to compile your code before you can run it, Python's an interpreted language, so it basically compiles as it's running. As each instruction is handed to the compiler, it compiles it and executes it right then and there. One of Python's main design philosophies when it was being made, it was to have a high level of readability, and it did a really good job with that. A lot of the syntax honestly just looks like it's written out in plain English, and on top of that, by executing code in blocks rather than using like curly braces and stuff like that to contain a block of code, it pretty much forces the user to indent it properly, whereas oftentimes with Java and C++, if you get somebody who's just real garbage and a real animal, you can end up finding code that's all written on a single line. But yeah, they don't allow that in Python, so thank you, Python. As mentioned before, Python can be pretty comparable to Java and C++ in a lot of ways, even down to the fact that it supports object-oriented programming, even though it's not technically an object-oriented programming language itself. And that's because of Python's massive comprehensive standard library, which basically means that as soon as you install Python, just by having it on your machine, you are given so many tools to do so many different things, more than you could probably come up with right then and there. That's why it's often called a batteries included language, basically meaning that everything you're going to need is going to come in the package. You don't have to go out and search the internet for a specific library that works well with what you're trying to do. It's probably just already built in. Because of this huge, complex, comprehensive standard library and the high readability of the code, you can basically write things that are as simple or as complex as you want them to. You can make a giant project with tons of libraries working in a ton of different fields, or you can just make something really small, simple, easy to read. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned veteran with programming, it's a great language for both. And now on to the top reasons why Python is probably the biggest listed language on LinkedIn, is that it is really big in the fields of data science, machine learning, and AI. Now, data science is just a growing field about collecting data and then interpreting it and learning things from it, and that spans every industry. So if you're good with data science and you learn Python well, you can get a job in just about any field. And machine learning and AI being such a new and powerful technology, once again, everybody in every field is trying to figure out how to leverage that to their advantage. So if you can learn how to use Python properly in machine learning and AI, or even all three of those different industries, then you are going to be making the big bucks and you're going to be just killing it out there. And after saying all those good things about Python, we have to have at least one bad thing. So we'll add here that Python is going to be one of the slowest languages out of the ones we talked about today that you're going to be working with. If you think back to our discussion about C++ and Java and how Java's slower because it's like a higher level programming language, you can just think about that, but to a much greater extent when we're talking about Python. So when you're working on machines or working on an application that's limited in the size that it can be, the power it can use, the memory allocation you have, then chances are Python's not going to be the best language for the job. But when Python is mainly used for these giant, heavy-hitting applications like machine learning, AI, data science, chances are you're not going to be working with a bad machine when you're doing that. They're going to give you something that hits heavy, like maybe your great-great-grandmother's computer if she's really been working on that guy. But with that small complaint aside, with Python being integral to all of these incredibly important and growing and powerful industries, and its ease of learning, ease of readability, and just comprehensive library that you can basically do anything with, Python is probably the perfect language to be learning right now in 2020 to make sure that you can get a job here soon, or just if you're starting off with software development and are thinking about wanting to get into it in the future. Thank you so much for watching. If there's any language you expected to see but didn't, let me know down in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. But other than that, I just really appreciate you sticking through these rough, awkward starting out videos, and I hope you can stick around to check out some of our future content, where I'll be discussing a lot of the aspects of programming, coming down to logic and just coding itself. But anyway, thanks again, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.